start out with a little bit of an odd intro and question. Lord of the Rings fans, let me see hands. Okay, pretty much everybody. All right, good. If you're not, then shame on you. All right, so question, weird question. Who is maybe generally considered the strongest character in all of Middle Earth? Wrong. I'll give you a hint. It is not a major character. I'm talking about power, just raw power. It is Tom Bombadil. Now, if you don't know who Tom Bombadil is, that means you're not like a true Lord of the Rings nerd, because Tom Bombadil is not in the original movies, which are like really old now, but not in the movies. He is like a very unique character, but extremely powerful. Like he has a reputation of being like maybe the oldest person in Middle Earth, maybe the most powerful. Whenever they have the council at Elrond and Rivendell, they talk about just giving him the ring because it would be safe. No one will be strong enough to take it from him. And he's so strong that he doesn't need the ring. The problem is that he's so strong that he would probably just not care about the ring and forget about it. But Tom Bombadil. Weird way to start a Sunday school lesson, right? So here's why. I'm letting you in on an insider little secret, an insider joke between my wife and I, who is my lovely wife sitting back there in the back. So I don't even remember how this started, but I think it was years ago. We were studying and Melchizedek came up. So Melchizedek is a little bit of a side topic of what we will discuss today. We'll see in just a second. But Melchizedek is like a unique, nuanced figure that's kind of mentioned just in passing, but also seems to be like incredibly powerful, very relevant, significant to the story, but just gets a very small mention. So anytime that we're in like a setting where Melchizedek is mentioned, my wife and I turn to each other and we say Tom Bombadil, because there's a parallel there. So now, from now on, anytime you hear Melchizedek mentioned, you're going to think to yourself, Tom Bombadil. Or maybe not, whatever. That's fine too. All right, so Melchizedek is where we're going to start. Genesis 14. Go there. All right, while you're turning, I'm going to, now that we got Lord of the Rings out of the way, I'm going to open this up in prayer, kind of set a little bit of foundation here. So pray with me, please. Father God, thank you for the opportunity to dive into your word this morning. Thank you for these students, for their willingness to rise early, to be here, to center themselves on you, your word. God, I pray that you would use this time, speak through me, speak to us, that we would gain insight from you, gain encouragement from time in your word, God, but ultimately we would be drawn towards you and that your name would be glorified in this, God. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, Genesis 14. So let me set some context here. Here's what's going on. This is, relatively early, right? This is before Abraham is Abraham. He's still Abram, right? Relatively early in his life. Not very many of the promises that we have been looking at have been declared to Abram yet. He's a small-time tribal leader amongst a group of a whole bunch of other tribes and leaders. Well, as happened in those days, and as I guess still happens in these days, there's all kinds of skirmishes in the Middle East between these tribes, different people groups. So what's happening is that some of Abram's allies, these local kings, local tribal groups, have ended up in this battle, this skirmish with the enemy tribes and kings. One of Abram's allies is Sodom. And this is before the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but local little kingdom Sodom, where his nephew Lot lives. And in this battle, Lot is taken hostage. They're running off with him. So Abram decides he's going to jump into this battle. And he and his forces, he's got several hundred men. They are kind of strike the decisive blow in this battle, this victory. And they are coming back to their lands victorious, and people are kind of welcoming them, including all of his ally kings who are welcoming him on a victorious return. Okay? So, this is where we're going to pick up. Go, let's see, 17 through 20. So Genesis 14, 17 through 20. Anybody want to read that for us? I need one volunteer. Come on, you guys. All right, there we go. Be loud and proud. Just call it Chad. This is King Chad. Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay, so what do we see here? This mention of Melchizedek is almost kind of a side comment. It's almost kind of a throwaway. Note that you could leave out verses 18 through 20 where Melchizedek is mentioned, and the text would be completely thorough, complete, consistent, right? So we got just a few verses in there where we've got this random dude that's thrown in there that meets Abraham, gives him a blessing, Abraham gives him a little bit of money, and then the story moves on, right? So it'd be easy to just be kind of like, okay, well, that's weird, but whatever, and keep going, right? Seemingly insignificant, but it is not insignificant, okay? There's a lot that's going on here. First, if you were an Old Testament Jew that was reading this, it would really stand out to you because the way that the writing worked for them, anytime that you had a character of significance who was important or that played a central role to the story, there was significant context that was given for them. Almost always their genealogy was given, right? In that day and age, who you were was defined by where you came from. So here we have a king that Abraham pays homage to, right? He's important. That's obvious in the text. It would be obvious to a Jewish audience that's reading that. But we don't know anything about him. So if you were a Jew reading this, you'd be like, what in the world is going on here? Who is this dude? It would captivate your attention. Secondly, again, for an Old Testament Jew, names have significance. There's incredible meaning in a name. So, Melch means king, Zedek means righteousness. By his name, Melchizedek is the king of righteousness. It also says, what is he the king of? What's his land? Salem. What does Salem mean? Peace. He's the king of peace. Now, Salem, there's virtually no reason not to think that Salem does not someday become Jerusalem. He is the land that would one day become Jerusalem. Now, it just becomes a little bit more curious, right? What is going on with this dude? So, interesting question. You guys know, if you were in chapel a couple weeks ago when I talked, one of the things I mentioned is I really love character studies, especially biblical character studies, to understand their context, who they are, why they make the decisions that they do, and really what the role is that they play in the story that God is telling here. There's not very much here for us to take from what's going on with Melchizedek. Who is he? That is such an interesting question. And you guys, if you've been in my small group, like we've talked about this for like a year and a half now, right? And we've been teasing this moment, okay? Such an interesting question. But the reality is that Melchizedek, he's not really the main character in the story. This story in Genesis 14, or even the story that we're going to talk about today. Kind of. But I'm going to use that question as a teaser. Who is Melchizedek? And we're going to come back to that, okay? But I'm going to keep going because Genesis 14 is not the only time that Melchizedek is mentioned. He's also mentioned in Psalm 110, which is primarily where we are going to camp out today, and then multiple times in Hebrews. Multiple times in Hebrews. So, Psalm 110. Psalm 110. Go to Psalm 110. What do we know about Psalm 110? Give me some tidbits. Psalm 110, not just the most quoted psalm. Psalm 110 is the most quoted Old Testament passage in all of the New Testament. Blake likes to say that it is God's favorite verse. Right? Huh? David wrote it. Yeah, which we're going to dwell on a little bit today. Okay? It is one of a small handful of what is referred to as messianic psalms. Okay? The two most well-known of those are Psalm 2 and Psalm 110, Psalm 2 was last week. Psalm 110 is today. So for some context, I told you to turn to Psalm 110. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's actually go to Psalm 2. Backtrack a little bit. We're going to rewind a week. So I know we just did this last week, but reiteration is a good thing. Anybody want to read Psalm 2? It's not super long. Give me a volunteer. Okay, Psalm 2. Awesome. Okay, so question. What is the main message that God is trying to convey here in Psalm 2? What's the big takeaway? Summarize last week in one sentence. How about this? God's plan goes through a king. Is that fair? Psalm 2. God's plan goes through a king. So we see multiple references, allusions to that. The big three, maybe verse 2, the Lord's anointed. Verse 6, set my king on Zion, my holy hill. Verse 9, rod of iron. And iron is an instrument of ruling. Rod of iron. Okay? God's plan goes through a king. So question. This king that is referenced in Psalm 2, is this David and the nation of Israel? Or is it Messiah, Jesus, and God's larger kingdom? That is the correct answer. The answer is yes. It's both, right? That's what Psalm 2 is talking about. It is, for a native Jewish audience, right? Old Testament Jewish audience that's reading this, they're probably thinking David. That's what this is about. Maybe we can see some inklings of Messiah in here, but probably more leaning towards interpretation of David. For us, in hindsight, we look back, obviously this is talking about both, right? There's huge messianic implications here in Psalm 2, right? But the reality is it's both, okay? All right, that's the context for Psalm 110. Now, Psalm 110, let's go. All right, who wants it? All right, get it.
The Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool to your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion. Troops will be willing on your day of battle, arrayed in holy majesty. When the victory is won, you will receive food every year. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek.
Ding, 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 ding.
The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead. Therefore, he will lift up his head.
Okay, question. I'm going to ask the same question about Psalm 110 that we just asked about Psalm 2. Is this about David and the nation of Israel, or is it about a coming Messiah, king, and God's larger kingdom? No. It is not about David. is not about David. This is so important. How do we know? How do we know? I'll tell you how we know. Because Jesus said so. All right? Go to Matthew. Matthew 22. Matthew 22. Okay, we're going to read 41 through 46. Matthew 22, 41 through 46. All right, anybody want to read that one? Luke's got it. All right, pause. Sorry. What did Jesus just ask them? What do you think about the Christ? Okay, now, again, let me set some context here. What is he really asking them? Who is asking the question? Okay, what's his name? His name is not Jesus Christ. He's not asking them about himself, right? What's he asking them? Christ is the Greek word for Messiah. He's asking them, what do you think about the Messiah? He's not saying, what do you think about me? I mean, kind of, but not, right? He's asking them based on a historic Old Testament context. What do you think about the Messiah? What do you know about the Messiah? Right? And he's not implying anything about himself into that yet. Right? It's very important to understand that. All right, Luke, sorry, keep going. What do you think about the Christ? Where's that come from? Psalm 110. Okay. So, what does the Pharisees answer? What do you know about the Christ? Whose son is he? What's their answer? Why do they say that? Genealogically, the promise was that the Messiah, right, the king to come would come through David. It would be of the lineage of David. So it's David's son, right? Not Solomon necessarily, but of the lineage of David, right? What is Jesus using this story to convey to them? Ah, that's good. Yeah, that was not on my list, but I like that. Say that again. The son of David existed before David did. Yeah, I like that. What else? What is Jesus using this passage to illustrate? Okay. Yes, the Messiah, the Christ, is going to come from David, but he's so much bigger than David. Right? He's not just David's descendant. He's not just David's son. He is greater than David, infinitely greater than David. Okay. Go to Acts 2. Jumping around a lot today, as we have done a lot this semester. That's okay. It's a good thing. Again, part of what we're doing is trying to tie in the big story of the Bible. How does it all fit together? So we're going to read Acts 2, 29 through 36. What's the subheading in this section of Acts? Anybody? What's the title of this section? All right, so it's Pentecost. Peter's preaching, right? Who's he preaching to? The mixed audience, right? Some early church Christians, new believers, but also just a lot of big Jewish audience, right? That are not necessarily Christians, right? Maybe even some of them that might be slightly hostile, okay? All right, 29 through 36. Anybody want to read that? Go.
Brothers, I may say to you with confidence that the patriarch died and was buried, and his tomb is with us.
Where's that come from? Psalm 110.
For all the house of Israel therefore know for certain that God has made him both Lord and Messiah.
Okay, so we have seen both from Jesus and from Peter who wrote Psalm 110. David did, right? All right, so here's the message that is trying to be conveyed to us from multiple sources, including Jesus himself. In Psalm 110, go back to Psalm 110:1. So again, interesting side fact. Psalm 110 is the most quoted chapter and passage in all of the Old Testament. Psalm 110:1 is the most quoted single verse from the Old Testament in the New Testament. What does Psalm 110:1 say? Anybody want to read that? How many people are involved in this conversation in Psalm 110:1? 3. You've got the author, the speaker, right? Who is talking about the Lord, right? And the author, the speaker, says, the Lord says to my Lord, right? There's 3 people involved in this conversation. Who's the author? David. What's David's position? He's a king. Kings don't call people lords, right? You get that, right? But yet, David is saying, the Lord says to my Lord. And Jesus says, who's this? Who's my Lord? Who is David referencing as my Lord? This is Messiah. This is Christ. This is Jesus. He doesn't explicitly reveal that in Matthew, but it is, right? What David is writing here is not about himself. It's about one who he knows is coming that is greater than he, right? What does Peter say about, in verse 36? Let the house of Israel know, the Jewish people know that God has made him both Lord and Christ. Right? And again, this is not Jesus' name. He's saying, this guy that you killed, right? He's not just David's heir. He's not just David's descendant. David died and he stayed dead. Jesus did not. And again, similar to last week, so much of it hinges on the resurrection. God raised him from the dead. He's not just a king. He's not just David's heir. He is the ruling and reigning Messiah, the one that has been prophesied for millennia. He's trying to get him, wake up. Jews, wake up. This is the guy you've been waiting for. Right? Now, come back to Psalm 110. Really, it's almost impossible to overstate the significance of Psalm 110. That's true for most of the passages that we've looked at this semester. They're really linchpin. They're hinge passages. But Psalm 110 is the first passage that is specifically speaking only of the Messiah to come. Right? Both in terms of how the biblical text is laid out and also in terms of the timeline. God is progressively revealing his plan. Last week in Psalm 2, the plan that goes through a king. Right? This week, the plan goes through not just a king, not just David's son or heir, but the perfect king, the king that would reign forever, the coming Messiah. Right? It's such a pivotal passage. But also, to this point in our conversation today, Psalm 110 is not saying much that's too different from Psalm 2 last week. Right? That God's plan goes through a king, a coming king. But that's not the only thing that Psalm 110 says about the Messiah. What else does it say? He's not just going to be a king, he's going to be a priest. Right? This is new. This is different. We haven't seen this before. Okay? So, verse 4. Verse 4 says, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Again, we keep kind of bouncing off of Melchizedek. Priest for order forever of the order of Melchizedek. Why does that matter? Why does it matter that the Messiah is going to be a priest? A couple of things. First of all, it was completely contrary to Old Testament law. Kings and priests were different. They were separate, right? Abram had a son whose name was Isaac. Isaac had a son whose name was Jacob. Then it was changed to Israel. Israel, Jacob, had how many sons? 12. From those 12 sons come the 12 tribes of Israel. Reuben was the oldest. There's a long line of them. Joseph was one of them, maybe the most well-known, right? Benjamin was the youngest, okay? But from those 12 sons, those 12 tribes, okay, in Numbers 3 establishes that the line of priests has to come from Levi, from the tribe of Levi. They had to be descendants of Aaron, okay? Aaron, Moses' brother, right? It's established in Mosaic law. Genesis 49:10. Well, first of all, let me ask you, where does the royal line come from? Judah, right? Judah was the fourth oldest son. Interesting, right, that the line of kings come from the fourth oldest, but God does things different sometimes, right? Line of kings comes from Judah. So, let me read Genesis 49:10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. Again, see, the ruler's staff is similar to the rod of iron that we saw in Psalm 2, right? The royal line comes through Judah. David was a descendant of Judah. So, this separation of priest and king was law. It was important to the Jewish people, as was the law. The law was important to them, right? The priests and the kings, they don't mix. They come from different line. They're completely separate, completely different. Like separation of powers, except like holy, right? It was also important to God. There's a reason that God put this in place, to keep the priests and the kings separate. It was so important that, so again, a couple weeks ago in chapel, we talked about Saul, first king of the nation of Israel. Ultimately, Saul's downfall, I mean, he rebelled against God. He didn't do what God said. But really the straw that broke the camel's back was that Saul, as the king, took on priestly duties. He went into the temple. He made sacrifices. Nope. God says, nope, that's it. You're done. Right? We don't mix priest and king. They're separate. But what does Psalm 110 say? Priest and king. Now, Melchizedek, he was a priest and king, right? But when? When in the timeline? When did Melchizedek come into the story? Genesis 14. That's before the Levites, right? It's before any of the law came into place. There was a priest who was a king who was a priest, Melchizedek, right? God is using that precedent to establish, to point towards what the Messiah is going to be, to look like, the roles that he will fill. So, what does all of this mean? Why does it matter? It would be really cool if you didn't have to take my word for it, right? Because what I'm teaching to you here, it's not inerrant. My word's not inerrant, okay? Right? Be checking me for flaws, factual errors, right? Commentaries are great, but they can be flawed. They can have issues. It'd be really nice if we had some sort of an inerrant, authoritative source. Good deal. Go to Hebrews. Melchizedek is mentioned twice in Hebrews 5, once in Hebrews 6, and then multiple times in Hebrews 7. Hebrews 5, 6, and 7, and especially 7, is almost a commentary of Psalm 110. So, we're going to read all of Hebrews 7. We're reading a lot of Bible this morning. That's a good thing. Who wants to read Hebrews 7?
That Abraham, returning from the slaughter of his that is, King of Peace. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, now if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise, rather than the one named after the order of Aaron? There is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily one of whom these things are spoken belongs to. No one has ever served at the altar. It's evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodies, by the power of indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever, after the order of on one hand, a former commandment is set aside, but on the other hand, a better hope is introduced, through which we draw near. Not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such by the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. Former priests were many in number because they were he holds his priesthood permanently because he consequently he is able to save the uttermost those. Always lives to make intercession for them. Has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifice. First for his own sins and then for those of the people. The law appoints men in their weakness as high priests. Later than the law appoints his son who has
Awesome. Okay, let me go through this real quick. Quick explanation. There's a lot in here, more than we have time to dig into. The first few verses through verse 3, really just kind of a biography of Melchizedek. Okay, some of that, most of that, we already kind of touched on, talked about. Verses 4 through 10. Verses 4 through 10. How would you summarize that? Really what God is saying here through the author is that Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. He's trying to establish him as being greater than Abraham. He's trying to put him in context, in place, because he's going to then compare Christ in that role and how Christ fulfills that role. Okay? The picture that is being conveyed here is that, yes, Melchizedek is priest and king, but Christ is feeling that as Messiah in the perfect way. He is a new and better Melchizedek, the priest and king that has been prophesied for millennia. I'm going to highlight a couple more verses, or reiterate a couple of verses. 22. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant, a new covenant. 25. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. 27. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered himself up. Jesus is the new and better Melchizedek. He is the king and priest. Why does it matter? In the grand scheme of things, Jesus is priest and king. Okay, great. Are those just facts? Does it matter? Of course it matters. Of course it matters. Why? Okay, a couple of questions. What does a king do? What is a king's role? To rule? Yeah. Keep going. Protect? Yep. Justice? Okay, awesome, yeah. Lead, shepherd, right? The existence of a king establishes a kingdom. It establishes a place. And all of those things come with it. Without a king, we have no place. We have no leader. We have no ruler. We have no shepherd. We have no justice in God's kingdom. Right? What does a priest do? Intercedes. Use a smaller word. Goes in between. In between who? A priest goes in between man and God. Is an intercessor. Is a mediator. Is an in-between between man and God. Both of those roles of priest and king have been filled for centuries and millennia, and they've all failed. Right? Without a priest, without a perfect priest, there is no relationship between the people and God, between us and God. Those two roles are absolutely necessary for us to be reconciled to God. It's not just trivia. It's not just facts. It matters immensely in God's plan. And that's the second point. In our small group on Tuesday nights, one of the questions that I've been repeatedly asking is, we're looking at big picture of the story, right? And from a number of different perspectives. But one of the questions that I have been asking is that, what is God telling us about himself in this story? Right? And the cool thing is, you got to remember, like we started way back in creation, right? And again, 4,000 years ago, looking back to Abraham, like nothing was known, right? God basically came and introduced himself to Abraham and said, hey, I'm God, we're going to be buddies, right? And then kind of slowly started telling him about himself, who he was. I'm the creator, I'm holy, I'm just, I'm gracious, I'm merciful. But as we start to progress now, Psalm 2, Psalm 110, what we're starting to see is that God is revealing, yes, still more about himself, but really more about his plan, right? We saw in Psalm 2, the plan goes through a king. Psalm 110, the plan goes through a priest and king. And the cool thing about this is, God's not winging this, right? This is the plan that has been in place since before time was created, right? All along, this has been the plan. Priest and king. I'm going to fill that role myself. And I'm going to give just little glimpses of foreshadowing at every step along the way. Right? Psalm 110 was one of those. You know what another one was? Melchizedek. Right? So go back to my first question, my teaser question. Who was Melchizedek? All right, so you got to understand, right? I am taking off any kind of authority that I have right now, and I'm going to give you my opinion. This is my opinion. This is not authoritative, okay? I think Melchizedek was a Christophany. Christophany means that he's a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. Incarnate means whenever the second person of the Trinity takes on flesh and became Jesus. I think Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate Christophany. That God the Son came down and assumed this role as a little tribal leader and was a priest and king of Jerusalem. Now, a lot of people that I respect disagree with me, right? Because if you go to Hebrews 7, says that he resembles the Son of God, right? Not that he was the Son of God, but he resembles the Son of God. So there's good arguments against it, right? But like for me, the way God works, there's too much. There's too much about what was true about Melchizedek for God to have not put himself there, just to plant a seed, to be foreshadowing of the plan that was to come for millennia until now. It's so cool. So cool. Well, apparently it's Q&A time. All right, go.
Is there any significance that Abraham
Yeah. So you caught that. So again, notice the question was, is there any significance to Melchizedek giving Abraham bread and wine? Yes, if you think that it's a Christophany, right? Even if it's not, it's foreshadowing, right? If Melchizedek is not a Christophany, if it's not the Son of God, it is definitely a typology, right? It is God ordaining this person who was a man to resemble a form of Christ in a number of ways, right? That would be foreshadowing of what's to come. And one of those would be, bread and wine. Ooh, Christophany. So Christ, ophany, O-F-H-A-N-Y. A-N-Y? What did I say? Christophany. Okay, F, yeah. Sorry. All right, Luke. I didn't know we were doing Q&A today. All right, good times. You got like 2 minutes before Coop's going to cut me off. Okay, yes. So, great question. So, those two words, so Christophany and theophany, are basically God appearing, right? So, I'll give you an example. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Rakshak and Benny, right? If you've got the VeggieTales version. So, when they're in the fire and the king looks in, how many people does he see? 4, right? So, I mean, God was there with them in the fire. In what form or fashion, I don't know. But there's only one way that God appears in flesh. That's the second person of the Trinity. That's the Son, right? Now, Jesus was born to Mary. He took on a body. That's a person, right? So there's some differences of opinion on, like, if a Christophany actually exists, if Jesus took on bodily form in the Old Testament, did he look the same? Like, was he Jesus? Was he the same person? I mean, there's no way to know that for sure. I tend to think not. I tend to think he looked different, but I mean, there's no way to know that for sure. But a theophany, a Christophany, is an Old Testament appearance of God.